Good afternoon, and welcome to our joint session with SailPoint, going through the results of our Identity and Access Management Survey. I'm Tom Venables. I'm the Practice Director at Turnkey for the Cyber and Application Security Practice, and I'm pleased to be joined by Raj and Chris to talk through Identity and Access Management, SAP, Access Management, and Access Controls. I think historically, we've seen SAP being a bit of a black box to some enterprise level identity solutions. Those of you who are familiar with SAP know that it can be a tricky system to govern. But what we'd like to do is talk through some of the questions that and responses that we've had. We had a phenomenal response rate. Over 900 people, I think, in the end have responded to the survey. And we're going to break down a few of the findings, see what we think it means for the industry. So I'll quickly hand over to Raj and Chris to introduce themselves. Raj, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. My name is Raj Patel. I'm a SAP security specialist at SailPoint. Previously to joining SailPoint, I was part of ERP Maestro, which got acquired by SailPoint. But previously to that, I was an SAP GRC consultant for 15 years. So I've been through the mill in terms of all the SAP related issues and problems that people have and going through the projects. And hopefully with the conversations we have today, we can find you maybe a nicer way of managing your SAP environments.
Excellent, thanks. And Chris?
So hi everyone, I'm Chris Boyle. I'm the Director for Identity and Access Management at Turnkey Consulting. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, delivering large-scale IAM programs across multiple sectors, multiple vendors, especially in the SailPoint arena.
Wonderful, and thanks for joining us today. So some useful insights into what we're going to be talking about. But what we're going to do is talk a little bit around what the IDAM managers within organizations can learn from some of the findings that we've got. We're going to touch on some of the integration points with SAP Identity and Access Management and Governance and wider enterprise level IAM. And some of the ways that we can manage that. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end. So please do feel free to post those into the chat for the session. So without further ado, diving straight into our survey responses. And this one I think was quite positive, obviously skewed by the number of SailPoint respondents that we've got. But whether or not automated access provisioning processes are in place. And I think a 98% response rate has got to warm your heart a little bit, Raj and Chris.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a phenomenal response. I guess what we do see in the market though is that when we talk about access provisioning, usually with clients, there's almost a base level of access that gets provisioned, and I think the ultimate goal of any provisioning is that you don't only get the base level of access, so your standard account that you log in with and your email address and that type of thing, but also looking at giving you all of the access that you need right from day one. So that 0-day provisioning type of concept, whereby when a user joins the organization, that they have everything they need to be effective from day one. So that's the end game, if you like.
Yep, automation is the way ahead.
Absolutely. And one of the things that leaps out to me on this one is I suppose we could have gone far more granular with the question to say, do you have an automated JML process? How many of your applications are in scope? Are you including things like GRC checks or segregation of duty checks as part of that? And I think that would change the figures slightly, but it's good to see that people are automating to this level and putting some governance around that, whether it's workflow-based approvals or integrating with HR JML processes, as we see SailPoint being able to deal with. So knowing that we have almost 100% of people with automation in place, we come on to the governance question of, do you evaluate the risks when you're performing this? And this is where the numbers start to change a little bit. What does this speak to for you, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is really essential because you've done all the hard work of removing the risk. And when you're then handing out new access to people, Really important to evaluate the risk that's going to be coming in. Otherwise, you're going to be doing remediation projects every other year. Evaluating risk is really important, and making the right decision makers as part of that risk evaluation process, the understanding of risk by the business who should be managing the risk, really critical. Otherwise, you're going to see remediation projects going on in the company year on end. It's going to be non-stop. So this is really one of the most important parts of automation. Nice to give someone access automatically, but are you bringing in risk when you're given the access?
Yeah, so you're talking there about when the provisioning action is being performed by the identity solution, making sure that an integrated step is included that says, okay, have you evaluated this? Chris, I noticed that there's a split in this question between, or in the responses between the cross-system and individual system risks. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so now I was just going to say, preventative controls are obviously what we're looking at, and if you look at the overall picture, 99% of people are, putting in preventative controls at some point around that, evaluating the risk. But I think as we move into a more sort of, cloud environment with applications across the board and people splitting out their ERP, so they might have, different HR systems, finance systems, etc., in different platforms, especially in the cloud. As people are kind of moving to S/4HANA and having multiple environments, I think that cross-system risk is absolutely, key to being able to maintain that risk posture across the entire environment. And not only within the ERP solutions, which is where we kind of see the primary focus for that risk analysis, but being able to do that across the enterprise is something that most companies are now starting to look at. Even if you take an example such as developers not being able to access production systems and things like that, it's absolutely essential to improve that risk posture.
Yeah, and especially from as we move towards a increasingly distributed IT architecture, people are adopting applications as SaaS models now. So it's a lot less within your control who has access to what, and that element of being able to understand, a risk to customer data, whether it exists in your CRM solution, your SAP environments, or wherever else it's coming from, and certainly in terms of sort of like customer self-service models where they're self-provisioning on a portal or a web platform, being able to understand how those identities interact and who has access to them is absolutely critical.
And having a solution like sort of SailPoint that kind of abstracts that away from those key systems and is able to provide that analysis is absolutely key to that. So you can with SailPoint, where you can either integrate with GRC or with ARM, where you can you can kind of replace that model within SailPoint. Ultimately, whichever model you're going to use, you can leverage the power of a risk analysis tool, but you can do that centrally, and you can do that across your entire enterprise landscape. And that's not only from a preventative control, but also detective as well, because if you have all that information in the central IAM tool, then when you run in your policy violation reports and things like that, it's looking at all of the information gathered from all of the different systems all in one place as well. So from an audit perspective as well, it does save a lot of time in providing the information to the auditors as well.
Yeah, and let's remember the challenge behind cross-system is that every single system will have their own authorization model, the way they do things different, because SAP is probably buying companies and just using the model that's there. So without automation, if you're going to ask a group of people to kind of understand every single system and their different role models, it's a massive challenge. So with cross-system, the automation side becomes really critical.
Absolutely. But it's good to see so many people who are evaluating those cross-system risks. I think the 43% can be doing more, but it's still a good statistic that this is front and center in people's minds. So it's good to see the respondents taking that so seriously. This one, have you deployed an enterprise identity management solution? I don't think I'm surprised at the large percentage that are not using it to provision access to SAP, as we mentioned at the top of the session. SAP is a bit of a black box. I know, Chris, before you and I started working together, it was a bit of a dirty word from an enterprise perspective. But quite a good percentage are integrating SAP. I mean, Chris, you've been doing this for 20 years, and what do you see as the barrier to entry for SAP integrating with enterprise solutions?
I think it's down to complexity. You know, like you said, Tom, before we started working together, and you know, we're able to, you know, integrate with, you know, and kind of leverage the power of the SAP security consultants who really understand the complex data models, the security models. Sorry. What tended to happen before is, you know, you would look at an architecture diagram and you would see SAP as just a single box on a page, and you know, you'd kind of look at that, and then when you delve into it and you kind of understand the SAP landscape, and it's almost another IT landscape all to itself. You know, multiple systems, multiple security models, all with different, you know, entitlements, roles, each system needing their accounts and things like that. It suddenly becomes, wow, that's a huge exercise. And then what we tended to find was that, you know, from an enterprise perspective, it was, you know, SAP then kind of, you know, people used to put into phase 2, phase 3, etc. And I think that's one of the key things. So having an IAM solution that, you know, with like SailPoint, whereby, you know, it has the out of the box connectors, it can, you know, it understands the role models. It really can then bring it into, you know, being able to provision and govern the access across SAP as it does the wider landscape as well. And also as well, I think from a business perspective, what you generally find is that your IT team is separate from your SAP team, and then therefore, you know, they're almost two separate teams that don't necessarily, you know, if a user requests access from an IT perspective, that will be handled by the IT team and then passed to SAP if they need any SAP access as well. So there's that disparagement there between the two teams.
Yeah, we certainly see those silos in a number of the integration scenarios, like on the cyber side. You know, there's solutions covering 90% of the estate, and then SAP is left out. But I think, Raj, the acquisition of ARM and the deployment of that shows just how seriously SailPoint are starting to take the SAP landscapes. I mean, obviously, with your background, you're very keen to see that journey continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key problem where I see where the identity solution isn't used for SAP is that the reporting that comes out sometimes for SAP risk is very, very complex, and it takes a lot of understanding. And that means it gets stuck in that queue in the middle and says, right, I need to go and talk to John from accounts payable to see if this is the right thing to do for this person. And that's where you're going to have to bring in a solution where your automated solution can go to the business and say, this is John and he has this risk in business language. And then John goes to the system and says, I understand it's business language, is what I talk. And then they agree or not agree. But the reason is that it slows the process down because it comes in multiple lines of Excel data or whatever it comes in. And it's very difficult for the business to understand the risk. You need to make it clear for the business what the risk is and get them to sign it off. And that's where this ARM integration with IDN is going to be a massive win for customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I know, Raj, we've spent a large part of our career fighting to take risk ownership out of IT and put it into the business where it belongs. So yeah, I think that's an important message there. And with that in mind, the next question speaks exactly to that sort of split in responsibility. Who manages identity within an organization? And you can see largely it's seen as the responsibility of IT. I think there's an increasing percentage of people who have a dedicated identity and access management team. It's quite good to see that risk management is on there, because it shows that people are taking identity as, you know, one of those first points of control seriously. Chris, was any of this surprising to you?
No, actually, I think it just kind of shows what we actually, you know, see in the market with, you know, with different clients across all industries as well. And I think one of the things that, you know, that I guess while we're looking at different teams managing different elements of this, you know, it's easy to forget that actually from a user experience perspective, that's not an ideal situation, because if they've raised a request for something, the user is not going to know these different teams in the background, so if they need to be chasing that access, etc., from their perspective, it can be frustrating because, if you typically just ring the IT department, right, and say, I've raised a service request, what's happened? And then it's, you need to speak to this team or this team or this team. So, having, automation in place that, and also being that kind of single pane of glass where you can go to one system, whether it be sort of integration with ServiceNow or the access request tool of choice, and being able to go to that and from a user perspective understand where the request is, and where that provisioning task is absolutely key as well, because ultimately it's the users that it's the user experience that needs to be improved, and how that happens at the back end really is it's not their concern, as it were. So simplicity is key, really.
Yeah, and Raj, whilst it doesn't say the business own this, I think the concept of that company-wide, an automation piece where, as Chris said, it's transparent to the user. As far as they're concerned, they just need to sign in on Monday morning and be able to do their job, right? And that's key to what we're trying to achieve here.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Exactly. I mean, there's a way of, for example, when somebody joins a company, they join a certain position or job in the company, there should be a set of access that they just get as part of that job, and then there'll be some additional access that they may need as maybe they do bits that they don't normally do. But all this automation is really important, because the more you can automate, the more you can kind of pre-configure and say, this person's sitting in that accountant chair, so he'll need A, B, C, D, these systems. Get that all in place. You lose a lot of time as a company, efficiency-wise, by somebody trying to get the access, and access comes after a week, 2 weeks. You might have expensive consultants sitting there for 2 weeks of frustration. They might need additional access, and that takes a long time. And that's going to cause a lot of inefficiencies at your company in terms of getting things done. It's really, really critical to do that. And just one other thing, who manages identity and access in your organization? Actually, at the end of the day, if you think about it, as Tom, you mentioned, the systems are so distributed now. You have a HR system, you have a procurement system, you have finance systems, you have all sorts of different systems in the expenses, etc. Is it going to be one set of people who are going to manage it because it's one person, set of people going to understand it all, or do we need to now also go down the IAM route of a distributed model where actually there's some people who manage this bit, some people who manage and approve that bit? And what model do you need to support? That central model or a more distributed model where if somebody wants access to HR, they're going to have to ask someone in HR for that access?
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, Chris, go on.
That's all right. I was just going to say as well, great point that, Raj, whereby also there's a cost associated with all of that. So not only from the cost of multiple teams managing the access and the manual processes and things like that, but there's also a cost to the business by people not having the access that they need. Like you say, if you have if you have contractors in the business, and they're unable to do their jobs, there's a high cost back to the business as well, and them not being able to be as effective as they could be. So, there's consequential cost to this as well.
And I suppose one of the final pieces there is that job-based access profile that you're describing, Raj, with tools like ARM or with good access governance tools, you can pre-analyze those and say, okay, we know that this IT help desk person that we've just hired, their standard access profile doesn't have any risk. So there needs to be no delay to that provisioning process. And actually, we can just allocate whatever they need. If there is an exception to that, where those edge use cases that you described come in, we can then use that automation to accelerate that element of the process. So we get those savings that you're both describing.
And it's nice to think that lots of this stuff's automated, but there's almost a perception of automation sometimes where a lot of it's a manual process, but it's just done very quickly. So obviously automation is definitely the way forward, but also it can be it can be complex as well, because the processes need to be in place, right? Because automation is just going to make those processes happen a lot quicker. So getting the processes right is absolutely key to any sort of IAM solution.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you alluded to there, Raj, was that different applications you might have different teams managing access. So it's not necessarily just the IT team; it's the application-specific components within the IT organization. And I think that's borne out by this next question, where we have dedicated SAP security resources governing access to SAP. I mean, I'm not going to complain because it's paid my bills for the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. SAP now is becoming a really wide environment. I mean, if you talk to your SAP security person at your company, they're like, well, I know SAP really well, and now I need to learn BW and success factors and Ariba and Concur and Fieldglass and all the different authorization models within that. And you know what? I think it's going to sometimes go too much. I don't think they'll get a good understanding of any of it. And this is where you need to have specialists, business people who understand what a purchase order is, what an invoice is, managing those systems in terms of the access, setting the rules for those systems, and actually being part of the approval.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, speaking of bills being paid, Tom, doesn't Live paid your internet bill?
Cut off.
Have you got cut off there?
I'm here.
I don't know. I think Tom's been cut off there.
Okay, so we can carry on for a minute. So yeah, I think, Chris, that the key thing is that we have to, the complexity now of the different authorization models means you need to have some sort of automation, those job roles in place, make it easier, and able to direct workflows to people. We're not saying it's going to be their job, but it's saying, this is Raj, he works in HR, he would like to create a purchase order. That should go to that procurement person and say, well, why do you want to create a purchase order, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say there, that's a specialist skill set. So it's quite right that there's people across different teams that have that specialist skill set to be able to do that. But I think if you can abstract those data models into something that makes it easier for the user, so having a kind of the central system with role-based access control or attribute-based access control, where people are getting most of the access that they need, from a central system that not only gives them access to SAP, but gives them access across the estate, makes it easier for the user, so the user experience is better, and then it's easier to manage, to govern, to report on, and ultimately to audit and comply with.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully I'm back, guys. Apologies, I had some issues with Zoom there, but hopefully you can see my screen again. The bit that concerns me on this one is that any access to any system should be reflective of the business processes that it's supporting, and I'm hoping that's the point that you've just been articulating far more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So question 7 is specifically around the access governance piece, and can people identify those toxic combinations or those privileged entitlements within their systems? And there's an interesting split here. Only 1% of people saying that they have no capability to do that. Quite a few using SAP's own GRC access control solution. I'm hoping that 33% are using ARM, given that there's a large portion of SailPoint respondents on here. There's also quite a few doing it manually, and I think that's quite a costly and time-consuming process. Raj, you've been doing this for quite a while in SAP. How long does it take to generate an SOD report manually, would you say?
Manually, to be honest, it's almost impossible to generate an accurate one, because an accurate one would mean a combination of transaction codes, authorization objects and values versus another one. So if you were to do that in SUIM with the restrictions of number of objects you can put in the report in there, I think it's almost impossible to do an accurate report. You can probably do that at transaction code level, but that doesn't mean a lot. The real one is where you do that. So it's almost impossible to do it manually. And the bigger cost of manual is actually going to be, there are people in the organization who might be sitting there doing fraudulent activity. So the cost of actually not using any solution to do your SAP, because that's where all your money comes in and out of your SAP systems. The cost of not doing proper checks in there, you don't know what the cost is today, but you might find out in 2 years' time what the actual cost is because of some things that are happening. So, so really, really important that, you know, manual is with SAP, and the complexity of it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think the other element of that is something Chris touched on earlier, which is you want these to be preventative controls, and manual is very, very hard to integrate into any sort of preventative process. I think it also, I think it conflicts a little bit with the question we had at the start, where 98% of respondents have got an automated process in place. But then once we start to drill into the details there and hit the SAP landscape, we start to see where that automated process might not have 100% coverage, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Go on, Chris.
No, I was just going to say as well, and you know, from a compliance perspective as well, it's, you know, it's not only about well, you know, the primary focus is reducing that risk to the business of fraudulent activity, but also there's a cost implication of, you know, being able to prove that you've got those controls in place, and if that's a manual process, you know, we've seen this before where, you know, companies are spending a fortune because they've got teams of people, you know, analysing data and spreadsheets and things like that, and just the human cost of actually, you know, providing and proving that you're, you know, able to identify the risk across the organisation, and you know, and that you're complying with the regulations and everything like that is actually quite high. So, you know, being able to do that using the whether it's GRC or ARM, you know, absolutely reduces the cost profile as well as the risk cost.
And the added benefit that we're reducing risk at the same time. So it's a win-win. And I think further on that, the utilization data that question 8 is focusing on, you know, identifying who's using what access, not just what can they do, but what have they done. I know that you know, that data is accessible manually, but it's not tied through to a risk-based approach. It's not exposed to the business risk owners, as you highlighted, Raj. And I think that certainly in remediation programs and things like that, if you can back up your decision making, saying users don't need these entitlements in these systems, and here is the proof because they've never used them, that makes that conversation a lot easier.
Yeah, this is so important in the remediation process, because, you know, almost 80% of your risk that's probably there in your environment right now is not being used, and the biggest time consumer of risk is if you have to go and talk to 100% of the people about the risk and have deep conversation with them before finding out at the end to say, actually, I don't use this transaction code, so you can take it away. Actually, if you can say that 80% of time by actually just knowing that they don't use it and saying, you don't use it, I want to take it away, is that okay with you? You can then focus your energies on fixing those 20% who are using that risk, because you don't want to always take the shortcut of mitigating controls. That's the easy path. You want to actually might need to expand the business teams. You might have to send a process to another team, and you need time for that. So you need time for those 20%, and to get a time for the 20%, you have to make that 80% a lot easier. And having that utilization data, well, 80%, you don't use it, let me take that risk away from you.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the key things there is, you know, using the tools that you have available. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, you know, we use that for access modeling in SailPoint. So being able to, you know, using those types of techniques to be able to you know, define roles and who has access. Because if you ask the user, do you need that access? They're always going to say yes, because they're scared that if you take that away, it'll have an inadvertent effect, right? So being able to actually look at actually what they use and look at that transaction data is absolutely key to building up the whether or not, you know, that access is actually required. But that also introduces, you know, so much data. You know, there's so much information, so much transactional data there. Actually having the kind of the AI tools in the background to be able to analyze that, the analytics tools to be able to analyze that, and then build out better quality roles is definitely the way that, you know, it saves money across the organisation.
Absolutely, and I think that then feeds into the remediation discussion, and we see a number of people who are specifying that they're automating that remediation, and I think this is tied into that provisioning element. So I mean, I'd love a button I could click that would clean up all my access violations of my roles. I haven't yet seen one that does it quite as effectively as the approach that you're saying with the business ownership, Raj. But I think this question might be skewed a little bit by the provisioning workflow elements and those automated identity and access management processes that we've been discussing all the way through, where if it does identify a problem, it can then workflow through to an owner who says, yeah, don't provision that because I don't want that person to be able to create a vendor and pay it or whatever the violation is. Did anything jump out at you from this one, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking a computer-generated algorithm to go into your system and remove a transaction code and then try and work out which parts of the authorization objects aren't relevant for other transaction codes in the role, and then you're going to move that into production, and all of a sudden, half the team somewhere else has lost a lot of access, which is business critical. So I'm not sure that this question maybe was. I wish there was a magic role tool that did everything and did all the regression testing and everything, but I think that's the case. But obviously, if you can restrict it to the provisioning, that's the biggest way to do it. Really, that technical role change at the end, it's actually probably the easiest part of the entire process. Remove this transaction code and make this activity 03 or display in this object. That's the easy part. The hard part is identifying that the objects, finding that usage data to see if people are using it, getting agreement from the business, getting all the sign-offs. That's the hard part. The easy part is actually going in and doing that role change at the end.
Yeah, and I think if you tie that in with access recertifications and the access reviews, you have a typical example would be you have a line manager review. So the line manager would say, yes, my team need access to this. But then if you combine that with the role owners, now the role owners, if they could gather that data from the transaction codes to say, this access that's in the role that I own, nobody's using it, so therefore I'll be able to take that out of the role, and it give them better data to be able to analyze what's in their roles that they own. So kind of using the combination of access recertification, role ownership, and the information provided by the the tools that can monitor what's actually being used, that then can really reduce the amount of superfluous access that's that people are given.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, I was on a remediation program at a client not long ago, and we shared the utilization information from the risk analysis with the business, and they started saying, why on earth are people in this business unit using this part of the process when actually they should be using that part? So it gave them real insight into people not following their business processes as well, and they actually really found that level of insight into the compliance with internal processes. Not necessarily a risk-based discussion, but just we'd prefer that people park an invoice through FV65 for any of the SAP geeks out there, rather than using FB01 to directly post a journal or whatever bypass to the process they're doing.
Yeah, and sorry, but one last thing for me is, you've got two options. You can find out what people are doing in their job, for example. So you might get a group of treasury people and you might look at the usage logs and see what they're doing. Or you could go and ask them for their business documented process. And I bet you most companies, and hopefully that I'm wrong, but a lot of companies will not have strictly defined business processes. Say we as a team, we use these 10, 15 transactions to do our job, and this is how we do them, and it's all documented. I think a lot of the time these processes are not documented. So actually there's two things you can benefit from this. Actually, you can actually have the master data to document your business processes through the usage logs, whilst at the same time cleaning up your roles, going from 200 transactions to 20 transactions for that team, and then documenting it. So you kind of reverse engineering your business. And especially now, I think, guys, when you're going into S/4HANA landscape, you're going to have to start going down, because you don't want to be translating 200 transaction codes to 200 Fury apps or 200 HANA codes if you're not only using 20 of them. So it's really important now that you clean up the room, tidy up the room, make sure there's people, you're moving things that need to be moved, and the usage logs is actually the best way to find that data.
Yeah, that's a really important point, actually. And I think something we're seeing as a theme, as more and more customers undertake that sort of digital transformation journey, moving on to S4HANA and new SAP applications, we're also seeing in parallel the identity and access management streams, desperately trying to integrate. And I think if you're looking at a major application like an SAP ERP and upgrading that, and you're also looking at identity and access management, you need to keep those two pieces in your head at the same time and say, let's have an effectively governed access policy for SAP, but let's also make sure that it's not going to cause us any problems when we need to integrate with SailPoint IIQ for our provisioning. And we need to look a little bit outside the application. And speaking as an ex-SAP person, I know that I was quite SAP is the universe and everything outside it is fictitious. I've moved beyond that in the last few years, but there is that sort of tendency to think that our application is our baby and nobody else can help with it. But I think we need to integrate far more.
I think especially with the S4HANA journey as well now, so you're going to double up all of your all of your challenges and issues, because if you've got two different environments, your legacy one and your S4 one, then that everything that you just mentioned you've got to do twice. So again, doubling the amount of effort.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, actually, Chris, because with S4 you might actually be doubling up even if you switch off the legacy system immediately, because you've got front end and back end provisioning that you need to handle. So that's a good consideration for SAP customers taking that journey, is if you are using a distributed front-end gateway server, you've got dual user and role maintenance. So something like an identity and access management solution helps you not have to double the amount of work that your already overstretched security team. As we saw in one of the earlier questions, it's a dedicated SAP security team. They've now got twice as much work to do. So you can actually save even more effort by automating these processes.
Yeah, and I think if one thing you can take away from this is, if you go back to your teams right now, your internal security teams, and you say to them, I would like to see who's got access to what and what risk is involved, what risk is there in the environment, cross system, and within SAP, and maybe usage wise as well. If you get a blank look from your IT people, then you need to start thinking about other things, because right now you have these financial systems and you don't know what's going on in them, then that could be a problem. Yeah,
it's that identify part of our defensive framework, right? Those of you who are familiar with NIST as a cybersecurity approach, it starts with identify, then talks about protect. And I think identify is one of those areas where we say, okay, how many SAP users have you got? People say, well, it depends. No, it doesn't. There's a figure at the end of that question. There has to be. And when you expand that to the enterprise level, Chris, I'm sure you see duplication of identities, orphaned accounts, non-attributed accounts all over the place.
Oh yeah, absolutely, all the time. So one of the first things we do when we're putting in an IAM solution is to look at the orphaned accounts, look at the leaver process, and tidying up the access is absolutely essential, because one of the main challenges for quite a lot of organizations is that fact that there is not only superfluous access, but also people who have left the organization for various reasons. Their accounts remained, and then it's not being tidied up afterwards and things like that. So there is a lot of risk there, and an IAM tool can help you with that.
Yeah, and to bring that to the sort of SAP integration piece, which is the theme of what we're trying to get to today, I think our prerequisites to ensure that we've got this integration. On the IDAM side, you need homogenization of identity. You need an understanding of your sort of job-based access profiles. You also need that understanding within your SAP estate. And then to fold in the governance piece, you've got to make sure that those job-based access profiles are risk assessed and clean, and that they can be provisioned in a timely fashion so that you can generate the benefits that you're looking for from a good IDAM and governance process.
I think as well, so role-based access has been everybody's agenda for quite a number of years now, but we're actually seeing a little bit of a shift towards more attribute-based access control. So, based on the data that's in the relevant systems, grants you access to various things. So a lot of that can be automated based on the information that's available. So data quality is absolutely essential across all of these systems, especially once that information is probably gathering it from the HR system and making access control decisions based upon that information. It's absolutely essential that there's consistency of data and good data quality across all of the identity related authoritative sources.
Yeah, and Tom, you put a really important word there: governance. Governance in terms of managing your identities, managing your access, all of these things. Who's going to govern your business systems? It's the only people who can govern it. And I hate to keep making this point, but it's the business who have to govern this and your systems, because they will have an understanding of the individual processes. An HR person will probably not understand procurement. The procurement won't understand payroll. Payroll won't understand technical. You can make a long list like that. Those guys will have to be part of the governance process. The only way you can do that is to have a business intuitive system which talks to the business in their own language, not in IT language. Until you have that, they will not take the governance on, because they will just say, this is too difficult for me. I don't understand what you're saying. I can't be part of this governance process.
Yeah. And I think that is absolutely key. If we can't get some sort of central ownership of this, and we saw that this operationally is split across multiple teams within the respondents. There needs to be somebody who understands the challenge at the enterprise level, who can pull those pieces together. I do think what we've seen from the survey is not that surprising that SAP is still seen as a little bit of a separate beast from enterprise IDAM, but it is good to see that the gap is closing and that these silos are being broken down. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. I think there's one been posted in the Q&A section. It would be good to hear your thoughts on what the main purpose of an IDAM implementation is, i.e. is it risk reduction or operational efficiency, so those savings you were talking about, or is it a mix of both, and should one take precedence? It's a good question.
The answer, as always, is it depends. And different sectors, different businesses will have different priorities. And I think one of the key things with any IAM program is you have to have a strategy first. You can't implement an IAM solution as a tactical solution, because you have to understand really the needs of the business, and it's going to be the business that drives that. So, do you have if you're a highly regulated industry such as financial services, governance is going to be key. If you have SOX controls, again, governance is going to be key. But for the non-regulated sectors, then their primary focus is kind of user experience, provisioning, and things like that. So again, strategy is definitely the key. Understand your risks, understand the challenges, understand the regulatory compliance requirements, and then you can prioritize the different areas of IAM you want to deploy first and what's important to the business.
I'll differ slightly from you, Chris. For me, I think risk is the most important thing. Two reasons. When auditors come in and audit your company, if you have risk within it, it's going to be really, really costly for you to fix, and it's going to leave you exposed to the market, etc. So first thing, just to please the external auditor, managing your risk is, look, if you told an auditor, have 3 people sitting there and we don't have risk, they're perfectly happy. That's your process. They're not concerned. But that risk element, and also those fraudulent transactions that may be happening, and it's going to get more severe over time, the kind of fines that come in for companies when they don't do stuff. So you really need to manage the risk, but efficiency it comes parallel with that. If you have efficiency, you will manage your risk better. So it's really important. Without the efficiency, you won't be able to manage the risk, because it will be too much work and it will fail somewhere. If it's manual, it will definitely fail along the line. Somebody will shout at Tom and say, Tom, I really need the access, otherwise I'm going to tell your line manager, and Tom gives the access. And we don't want that to happen. That's what the big problem with manual processes is they have a human being shouting at another human being. The access might just get released. With automation, computers just ignore you, so it's all good.
Yeah, I get shouted at anyway, Raj. But I think I would say it depends on whether you're trying to build a business case for an investment or whether you've already secured it. I think the risk reduction objective is key. It's a definite benefit of a good identity and access management and well-governed process. But I think if you don't have the business case and you don't have the investment in that, then the return that those efficiencies give you is a good way to make that case up to whoever's making that investment. So I don't think one is necessarily more important than the other. I think I'd agree with Chris a little bit in that it depends, but it's certainly a good way of seeking that investment. Thank you both for your time this afternoon. I hope it's been interesting for everybody that's attended. We have one more question. I'm okay to answer it very quickly. Very interesting so far, thank you. If you have time to answer, how would we look to integrate access governance solutions with IAM solutions? Raj, to you first. With identity, with the SailPoint platforms, you can integrate GRC with it, and we also have the ARM solution, which has that usage-based data, and it's quite seamless, the integration that comes with it. You have the workflows where somebody creates an access for request. It might go to the manager for approval, the role approver for approval, and you might have that risk approver at the end, who's your kind of that strict person at the end who understands the risk and can fight back. And you fully integrate it within that kind of environment. Thank you. And Chris, I know this is one that you've banged your head against a couple of times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think now what we see in the kind of 4 areas of IAM, the governance, kind of the lifecycle management, are now kind of hand in hand. I think it's absolutely important, to what's the phrase, get clean, stay clean. So having that, the ability to review and govern the access that you already have, and then automate the provisioning off the back of that. But again, it comes down to when you put the automation in, it's making sure that the processes are key. What you're automating is well defined, because again, if you're just automating if you're just automating bad processes, then all you're doing is you're making those processes just very quick.
Yeah. And I think the thing I would add here is that you need to pick a lane for your solutions. So if you want your IDAM solution to handle provisioning, let it handle provisioning, and don't try and mix and match too much. So if you're doing your risk analysis and your workflow handling for those elements in an access control solution like ARM or SAP GRC, then let that handle those elements, but then feed that information back to your provisioning engine so that it can do what it does well, and you can leave your access control solution doing what that does well. I think that certainly helps with that integration journey.
I think with the SailPoint solution specifically as well, there's the different modules. So you can get the governance module, and you can get the provisioning module. You can also get the SAP GRC integration one, the ServiceNow, and I think that one of the great things about SailPoint is it integrates with your existing solutions, whatever they may be. So if you do already have a provisioning solution, you are using SAP GRC, yes, SailPoint can do all of that for you, but it can also integrate with what it is that you have.
Yeah, excellent. We have run 5 minutes over. There are a couple of questions that we didn't get time to get to, so we'll respond to those offline and come back to you, Ahmad and Veronica. Thank you, Raj and Chris, for your time this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope it's been interesting. Do please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything specific that you'd like to address. And thank you, everyone.
Tom, did you just want to mention the next webinar?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chris, for reminding me. So we have another webinar coming up in conjunction with another partner about cybersecurity. That's on the 5th of October, talking about how to apply some cybersecurity principles to your SAP estate. So look forward to people attending then. Raj, thank you, and thank you, SailPoint, for putting this together with us.
No worries. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.